How would you handle having a close knit group of friends, but as soon as you became a mom, it felt like they all ghosted you? Here's one mom situation. I had my baby about 5 months ago, and honestly, I didn't expect it to feel like this. I love being a mom, but at the same time, I've never felt so invisible. Before I became a mom, I had this tight group of friends, group chats, random Target runs, get togethers. Now it feels like I've quietly disappeared from everyone's life. They'll like a baby photo here and there, but the invites stopped, the text slowed down. And then when I do see them, I feel like I have nothing to talk about that they'd actually understand. I keep thinking maybe I should try one of these mommy meetups, but the idea makes me anxious. I don't want to just sit in a circle talking about diaper brands and nap schedules. I want to find women I can actually connect with, women who care about me, but also get that my baby is a big part of my life now. Finances are tight, so paying for childcare just to go out and be social isn't realistic right now. Sometimes I feel guilty for even wanting that, like I should just be content and have a healthy baby, a roof over my head, but deep down I'm lonely. How do you make friends once you're a mom? Oh man, I'm sure as so many other moms can really relate to this. Once you become a mom, it can feel very much like, okay, you're in a completely different season of life from all of your other friends, especially if you're in the very first, person out of your close-knit friend group that is now entering into motherhood and feeling completely disconnected because there's so many more, variables that you're experiencing and commitments that you have on your time, on your finances, on like the variables impacting your life compared to the variables impacting your other not mom friends' lives. So, where does that kind of leave us? Because I definitely have felt like, okay, now that I'm a mom, do I just like not have any friends until my kids go into school? And then what does that look like if we decide to homeschool? And what does that look like if they're not involved in sports? And, I'm not participating in mommy and me groups. And like, where do I find friends when my time is so limited? But I want to meet other other friends, and I don't necessarily want to leave my other friends behind. So I do think that this is very challenging for a lot of moms that find themselves in this situation, that I think it's going to be helpful for us to talk through. But if you're another mom listening and you have some suggestions or you have very similar experiences, I would love for you to join this conversation in the comments, because I think that this is something that would really be very beneficial for all of us going through this. So, there's several things that you do address here, but some of the things that I do want to point out that we've kind of already touched on is the fact that your friends are in a completely different season of life than you are. And so there's going to be naturally this like distancing that is going to occur, despite even if neither you nor your friends are intentionally distancing yourselves from each other, because there's going to be a different pull on your time and your availability. We have to take care of our baby. We might still be working. We obviously need to connect with our spouse or our partner. The whole need to take care of ourselves. Like we might need more rest. We might need, more time at home. When it comes to our friends, they have a lot more time and availability. And then trying to find time where you both can connect, because there's much more limited time and energy and financial resources that you have compared to your friends. Like it can sometimes feel from your friend's perspective like, oh, you're just like blowing them off if you say no too many times. Or if they are a very considerate friend, then they might just kind of feel like, oh, I can't reach out to them. Or they might make excuses for you to say, like, oh, I don't want to ask if she's available. Like, she needs to rest. She needs to spend time with the baby, or they can't, where they're automatically like defaulting to saying no for you. And I had this conversation with one of my friends where like I would often tell her, is like, oh yeah, I thought about reaching out to you for such and such, and I recognize like, oh, it probably wouldn't work out, or you guys wouldn't be available. And she's like, stop stealing my no. She's like, it's not. And she was very kind about how she went about saying it, but basically the gist was, is like, I was choosing no for her by not even offering her the option to say no for herself. Like it's not on me to say, oh, you can't do that, oh, you're not available. Like the only thing that's on me is to present her the opportunity, and then it's on her to tell me if they can't do it and if it doesn't work out for them, because I trust that she will. Whereas, like, there can be this dynamic with friends, especially when you are in different seasons of life. They might be trying to be considerate of your new circumstance and your new stage of life, where they might be saying no for you, not because they're trying to cut or distance you out of their life, but just because they're trying to be considerate. So sometimes having that conversation with them, especially if you have a really good, strong, connection and friendship, it can sometimes, that might be a variable that's playing into this distancing that they may not even be necessarily aware of that they're doing. And so kind of broaching that subject with them to say like, hey, I miss you. Like, hey, I just because I'm a mom, that doesn't mean that I don't want you to be part of my life. And having this conversation where it's like, okay, a really honest conversation about what might your friendship need to look like moving forward. But also, I do think that we need to recognize that just because we were friends in the past, that doesn't necessarily mean that we will be, or we should assume that we're going to continue being friends moving into the future. There are some friendships that we will carry with us for a long portion of life, but then people change and variables change, and that it takes two people as part of a friendship to make effort to continue that friendship. It can't just all be on one person. So sometimes that may mean that you, if you're feeling that disconnection, it may be on you to facilitate and initiate more of those conversations, more of those meetups, more of that interaction with your friends that are in a different stage of life than you. But also, you need to be like really aware that if they are not reciprocating, then maybe it's because they're not necessarily interested in continuing the friendship when you guys are so disconnected as far as stages of life and variables that you are currently in. Because it doesn't mean that having friends that aren't sharing the same experiences with you can't happen, but it does take more effort, and some people are just not willing to make the effort or to take the time to be able to continue that friendship into the next season of life. And I know that can sound harsh, but that is sometimes the reality of where we can sometimes find ourselves in. I do recall that, like for me, once I became a mom, this is kind of like the opposite situation. I had a friend that was not a mom. I was experiencing a lot of challenges after becoming a mom. I have separate episodes about that if you're interested in it. But we were also on completely separate like financial what's the right word? Like there was a financial disparity between us. Hanging out with her, it felt very much like, okay, there was this expectation to spend a lot of money. Like the activities that she was interested in to me usually translated to mean like, okay, I have to spend not a lot, but I have to spend more money than maybe what was comfortable for us in our current financial situation to spend, because of that's what like she wanted to do, or that's how she wanted to get together and hang out. And then once I became a mom and realizing, okay, there are limited financial resources, there is limited time. And whenever I thought about getting like hanging out with her, I realized that I was just flooded with all of these like really negative emotions that was really hard for me to navigate as a new mom. And I do, looking back, I do wish that I had handled the situation completely differently than how I did, but also knowing that I had limited ability emotionally to regulate myself because of the very fragile mental and emotional situation I was in as a new mom, and going through all of these other challenges with, you know, adjusting to motherhood and like medical challenges with my child and like all of the things and variables that we were experiencing. I knew that that was just not a challenge that I could also handle in addition to everything else I was experiencing. And so I did have to have a really frank conversation with her where I was just like, I cannot continue being your friend in this manner because I can just not emotionally handle like everything that I'm experiencing right now. And just like letting her go as a friend, because I knew that outside again, no fault of her own, but just like how I was mentally reacting to the what it meant to be a friend and to show up in the way that she needed or wanted me to show up, I was had no capacity of doing that. And so I do think that sometimes when we are trying to keep the friendships that we've had in the past, there can be a lot more than what we are necessarily aware of happening, that a different dynamic that can be impacting that friendship than what we necessarily perceive or understand or know about. So, for example, if you just had a child and you are experiencing motherhood, what if your other friends, and they may not have expressed or chosen to confide this in you, but what if they're experiencing infertility? And so that might be a reason why they are drawing back from you, because that can be really challenging for them to witness and experience when they have this hole in their heart of realizing, like, okay, this is what I want, but now I'm seeing my friend live it out in front of me. And so I know it's really hard for me to be around you as a new mom because they're experiencing infertility and what they're going through. So again, I just want to like bring to light that there can be more dynamics to this whole keeping friends after we step into a new season of life than what we may be aware of or what our friendship relationship has felt safe to disclose to us. So I, even though there can be a lot of hurt and a lot of loneliness, I do think it's helpful for us to at least recognize and like vocalize that there be maybe more variables going on than just the fact of like, oh, my friends are pulling away because now I'm a mom and they can't relate to the season of life I'm in. There is one thing that you had said that I think is really important that you are recognizing. You said that when I do see them, I feel like I have nothing to talk about that they'd actually understand. And I think that sometimes if we are trying to encourage friendships and rebuild those relationships, that it's not, even though you're feeling really lonely and you're recognizing a need for this connection and when you're feeling like you're disappearing, I think sometimes it's like helpful for other people to be interested in yourself to like draw you back out and feel like, oh, I matter, I'm being seen. But when we're trying to nurture these friendships, I think that sometimes it's helpful for us to also recognize like, okay, it may be on us to carry the weight of initiating these friendships and building these friendships, especially if that's where we want to put our effort and time and invest in this person, in this friendship that we want to continue. So what that may mean for you is if you're kind of feeling like you're fading into the background and you don't have anything to say, that it may not be, the conversation may not need to be about you. Maybe it can't be about you. Maybe it needs to be completely on them and what they're experiencing, what they're going through. And again, that's why there's sometimes this disconnect when we become moms, because as the other person trying to carry this conversation, trying to have this good relationship, they might not know what to ask you, or they may not really necessarily care about, diaper changes and feeding challenges and how little lack of sleep you got, because they can't relate to any of it. So, if you're trying to nurture this friendship, it may need to solely be all of your questions, all of the context, all of the focus of when you do get together may need to be on the other person, not necessarily because that's how it should be, you know, completely continuing into the future, but at least you validate the fact that you care about this person in your life and they're important enough for you to completely focus on them and their life when you are together, to revalidate that friendship, to say like, yes, you are important to me, you are important enough for me to let go of the things that I'm currently experiencing and focus completely on you and your life and your situation and your challenges. And so I do think sometimes for a short period of time where you're trying to revalidate your friendship and say, this is important to me, that may be a sacrifice that you have to give to be able to validate your friend and saying, you're important enough to me that I'm going to leave everything I'm experiencing aside and we're going to just focus on you and building this relationship. And that doesn't necessarily have to be like expressly communicated in that way, but I think it is helpful for us to recognize like mentally, okay, I'm going to make the choice to not focus or not like bring up the things that I'm experiencing as a mom and focus solely on my friends, so that way they do know how important they are in my life. And if you're not mentally able to do that, then maybe it is a situation of recognizing, oh, I need to let this person go, because that's where I was when I recognized like, oh, this other person who's not, in the same season of life as I am, I knew I did not have the mental capacity to be able to do that. And so that's why I was like, I need to just like frankly tell her like, I'm just not in a good place of life where I can continue investing in our relationship as a friend. The other thing that you kind of mentioned is like this whole like mommy meetup anxiety and not really wanting the whole conversation to be about, like minuscule parenting things, like especially if you're experiencing that in a day-to-day situation, like maybe that's the last thing that you want to talk about. There are like these two different dynamics when it comes to moms, is we either talk fully about our kids and like our entire world is wrapped up into them, and especially when you're meeting new parents and new moms, like it's really easy to default to that because you automatically know, okay, this is something that I have in common. And when you're trying to like determine, is there compatibility here with friendships and interests and disinterests, and how they communicate and what their values are and what their parenting choices are. We as parents often default to talking about our kids because it's a really good way to us to like feel out, okay, is this someone that we have compatible values? Is this someone that we do have compatible lifestyles to? Is this someone that has the same interests and similarities as myself to actually invest in beyond just like small talk parenting things? So even though that is an anxiety that you have already identified and like, oh, that's not really what I'm looking for, like I don't want our conversations just to be surface level, that is when we think about like creating friends and creating relationships, that is usually where those friendships start, is in all of those surface level things. So I would just challenge your thinking that if you're like, oh well, I don't want to just talk about being a mom, I think that that's usually where those conversations start with other parents, because it's a really easy default to determine, are the values aligned for you to then discuss other things, and are there other topics that you both have interest in that could develop into a much stronger friendship further down the line. In our parenting is usually where we reflect the things that we personally value. And so if it's not something else that, like, if you have a parenting characteristic or like how you approach a certain situation, and then someone else approaches it completely different, there can be judgment there, but that doesn't necessarily mean that judgment is always necessarily bad. It's just a realization of like, oh, we have conflicting values, and so we're approaching this completely differently versus how another parent is approaching the exact same similar situation. So if there's judgment in that situation, that can sometimes be really helpful to know, like, oh, this isn't someone that I'm going to necessarily vibe with. This isn't necessarily someone that I want to invest that relationship in. I would much rather choose someone that is non-judgmental to my parenting choices based off of like how I've determined to raise my kids, and how I've determined to raise my kids doesn't necessarily mean that they have to make the same choice for how they raise their kids. And so that can sometimes be that level of judgment, even though it may be there, it can sometimes be a really good factor of how compatible will you guys be in relation to your friendship. I often think of like making new friends as kind of like the dating sphere, right? When you are first dating someone, you're kind of doing all those like surface level questions, trying to figure out what your interests are. But when you're parents, like you're in the thick of it right now. So I do think that sometimes we are kind of forced just based off of like, oh, these are small talk types of questions to discuss that have to do with our kids. But if we can go beyond that, after we've established, oh, are our values the same based off of how we're choosing to raise our kids, we need to have conversations beyond just what our kids are experiencing, right? We need to be able to connect at an actual personal level to develop those friendships. And sometimes what I have experienced is like, I will, especially when I was a new mom and I was like, oh, I'm seeing other moms very similarly in similar situations as and I was really feeling this loneliness. I chose a couple of moms where I was just like, hey, I really need some mom friends. Would you be interested in like getting together and just like, becoming friends? And sometimes that can come come across to other moms as like really like um what's the right word? Really aggressive, I guess. But some other moms might find that like really refreshing to be like, "Oh, yes, like that's exactly what I need. Like I'd love to hang out," or, "Let's see if our schedules work." And sometimes that can be helpful just to be like declare your intention like you would do in dating. Like when my husband and I started dating, like I let him know like I'm not dating you to like just date. Like I'm interested in like if we're going to date, this my intention is to see if we're compatible for marriage. And if you're not on the same page, like I don't want to waste my time. So having that conversation, I think, can sometimes be helpful if you feel comfortable having that conversation and approaching that conversation with another mom. But I also think that sometimes we need to also give ourselves really a lot of grace in this situation, because when we're parents, especially to young kids, that is going to be the time of our life that I think like the majority of our time and effort is going to be consumed in our kids, right? Like we're not sleeping well, they're not sleeping well, they're teething, there's a whole bunch of challenges that we're addressing. And so having additional availability and mental clarity to be able to invest in those friendships and carry on conversations and even find something to talk about that's not about diapers and feeding and teething and illnesses and stuff like that can sometimes require mental capacity that we may not be able to have or be able to give at this season and time in our life. Just recognizing some of those additional challenges that you may now be experiencing in this season of motherhood as compared to like when you didn't have kids, right? Like when you didn't have kids, your entire life was like consumed up in like your personal experiences, whereas now that you're a parent, your entire life is consumed in your children. And should our entire life be completely consumed in our children? No, absolutely not. I think that we need to, as moms, have an identity separate from our kids. Otherwise, there's going to create like this huge, awful dynamic as our kids get older. But I do think for a season of time, it makes sense that our focus is on our kids. And sometimes when we have friends that are not in the same season of life, they just cannot relate to what we're experiencing and feeling in our life. And if they're also a good friend that they recognize like, oh, this entire conversation should not be about just me, they might be struggling finding something to ask you about that would also be interested, especially if you are completely consumed in your kids and then they can't relate to that. So it's not always the fact like your friends are intentionally pulling away. It just may be that they are not fully equipped to know how to carry on a conversation because they can't relate to anything that you're currently experiencing. I do think that the loneliest season of motherhood that moms experience, and again, this is just like my anecdotal thoughts at the moment based off of my 7 years of motherhood, ask me again in 20 years, is in that newest mom season where you are newly becoming a mom and you're navigating all of these different changes, and maybe your friends are not in the same season of life that you are. And so you're not only going through the change that you're experiencing becoming a new mom and all of the dynamics of that, but then you're also like separating yourself, not you intentionally, but like there's like that social separating yourself of your previous experience of being a friend out in your social obligations outside of being a parent. And there's like this like spacing that occurs because your whole experience and how you can show up is different once you become a mom. And so I do feel like this may be like the loneliest period of motherhood that we experience as parents because there's this separation that occurs and then this whole new dynamic that we need to try to navigate as moms. So I do think that it is normal that you're experiencing that, but I do also want to like give you some encouragement if you find yourself in that situation. And I think just recognizing that you're not the only one that is or will ever experience this is really helpful. So you just like know, oh, this is like normal for me to be experiencing this. But how can we be proactive, especially if our previous friends are not interested in kind of walking into this new season of life with us? And I think just recognizing that this may take some time to find new friendships, especially if we're trying or have this expectation to replace the depth of our previous friends when we're trying to find new friends. One thing that I have heard some other moms say is like they actually took this time to really reinvest that into their spouse and their partner. I always had this philosophy when I was, before I became married, is like I wanted to marry someone that could be my best friend, someone that could enjoy life along with me. And I do think that becoming a parent and like going, like your spouse is going to know everything that you're experiencing because they're seeing you go through it daily. So that may be a really good time to like reinvest and reconnect in your relationship with your partner and with your spouse during this season of time. And then also finding different ways to connect with other parents, putting yourself in position where you could meet other people is going to probably be your best option, especially if your friends are pulling away and kind of disconnecting. Sometimes that might look like, like going to the park at the same time every week, going to the library at the same time every week. It might be like, being a little awkward. And if you see another mom at the grocery store that happens to have, another child around your age, maybe it's like connecting with her, again, being like that awkward one, like, hi, I know this is really weird, but I noticed you have a baby around the same age and I'm looking for friends and I'm just interested if you are too. I personally would not feel comfortable doing that, but depending on your personality and your dynamic, maybe that is something that you're like, oh yeah, like I could totally see myself doing that. But I do think that putting yourself in the same place on a regular basis, you're going to more so naturally like run into the same people at the same time. And if you're noticing that you're having interactions with, the same people, the same moms, then that will give you an opportunity to kind of create more natural, like organic friendship, because you're kind of seeing how they interact and how they, show up, and how they, who they are in those settings where there's not quite as much like pressure to become friends like there could be in mommy and me meetups and play dates and stuff like that. So I just kind of want to throw that out there as like an alternative option. I have heard of some moms like going on like a certain route every, day, taking a walk, and then they see other moms that happen to be walking at the same time, and they develop a, really good friendship over the course of just having been at the same place at the same time on a very consistent basis, because you're seeing them all the time in that manner. So I think those are some like different considerations that I do hope you find helpful. Again, if you're another mom that are experiencing this, or kind of going through this, I would love to hear your suggestions in the comments and kind of continue this conversation there. But if you have a question that you would like to submit, there's a link below that you can submit it, or you can email me as well if it doesn't all fit in the submission form. But if you are kind of looking for additional questions to ask, friends that you're developing this relationship with, I'll link up some additional episodes that you might feel helpful. So hopefully we'll hang out again soon.